allowed to talk over this. I feel like all of a sudden I'm in the early 80s.
Welcome to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society, whose mission is creating unity through music. And you have already heard from our guest today, good friend, fabulous musician, plays guitar, mandolin, and we've met quite a long time ago and been hanging out. Mr. Mark, a.k.a. Skip Casale.
That'll work, yeah, all right.
All right, that's who you are. You sure?
Well, it's my label.
That's what people seem to refer to you as. So we do go back through Archie Edwards Blues Heritage Foundation. We've hung out at Blues Week at Augusta, Elkins, West Virginia.
Your place,
that sort
house
of thing.
concerts.
House concerts. We've seen you at parties around. You know, you're kind of infamous and ubiquitous.
There was that trip to Bangkok. Remember that? That was...
Was that the name of a restaurant or something? Because I don't remember going to Bangkok with you. It would have been... Maybe we should plan that. It's possible. So, you're an excellent musician. When did you start playing? Do you remember? Was there music in your house? Was there music? And did your parents play?
Oh,
did you
yeah,
take lessons? How did music grab onto you?
Well, it was interesting. In my house growing up, everybody listened to loads of music. I was the youngest of 4 kids, and everybody listened to loads of music. My father was always very much about big band music, what's called the sweet big bands, like Glenn Miller and stuff like that. He would always commandeer the stereo on Sundays to listen to all that stuff. My mom... I mean, he was into a lot of stuff, but that was kind of his big thing. My mom, she liked a lot of stuff. She liked opera. She liked a lot of classical, but she also loved, there were certain rock things that she loved. She loved Janis Joplin. She loved Eric Clapton. She was crazy about Eric Clapton. And, it was always little stuff like that.
Neither one of them played music, though.
Nobody played in my family except for my not oldest, but next oldest sister. She started playing guitar around the time that I was about 10. And so there was a guitar in the house all of a sudden, and I would pick it up and mess with it. But no, nobody did. And it's interesting because a lot of that formed kind of who I became being a musician, for instance, because my dad, for instance, who's still alive, he's just turned 89, always wanted to play piano and never did it. And I've always encouraged him, and he's always been like, nah.
Right.
And because... he exemplifies a certain attitude that a lot of people have about playing music. And in a way, I think to the extent that got on me, it took a long time in my life to get to the point where I was playing music and I would play with people and like being in a place like this, like the shop.
Yeah, by the way, podcast listeners, we are at the Archie Edwards.
We are there.
And you can hear them in the background. They're rocking and
rolling
there.
The ungodly racket.
Yeah, whew. All right.
It's actually kind of musical today because you never know coming to the shop. It's always it can be like a total mess, but then sometimes it's actual music.
But it is, communicating.
And I mean, when I mean actual music, it's always music, but it's actual music sometimes because everybody's really listening and you can feel it.
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of plugging into the same thing. Not necessarily what somebody's singing, but they are plugging into the music, and it's amazing. It can really be cool. So,
yeah. So you were how old when you sort of picked up the first instrument in a serious way?
Well, I played with my sister's guitar in 7th grade. I was in a music class, and there was a whole sort of working yourself through these stations of music kind of thing, and one of them actually was guitar. And
a different instrument station.
Different instruments, like stuff like recorders and auto harps and that kind of thing, and that was all like interesting to me. But interestingly enough, I always had an attitude about the guitar. I was always, even when I was like, this is like I'm 10 years old, and even when I was 10, I thought, well, the world has enough guitar players. They don't need another guitar player in the world. And I kind of had an attitude in a sense about that, like, why would I want to play guitar? Everybody does that.
Right.
And yet when I picked it up, I got really sort of drawn to it. And then I kind of found myself picking up my sister's guitar more. She was taking lessons, and my mom at one point said, well, do you want to take lessons? And it was interesting because I said, yeah. And I said, yeah, because it was sort of like they were being offered, not because I wanted them. And so I did, and did that for a couple of years. And then I stopped playing guitar for like 15 years by around the time I was 18 or 19.
So when you were taking lessons in your teens, 15?
Yeah, 15. But the thing is like then I was I was making a lot of music, but I was making a lot of music that was like pure electronic music. So a lot of tape and a lot of tape manipulation and sound manipulation. So I wasn't really doing stuff that was songs. And I've just got hours and hours and hours of that. I did a lot of that.
You
with this friend of
recorded
mine.
yourself a lot.
Oh yeah, no, I've got largely between this friend of mine, Robin, who's still a very close friend of mine. He and I mean, he digitized all of this stuff and cleaned it up a number of years ago, and it's hours and hours of these pieces of stuff that we did. Very electronic, very experimental.
You were doing rock music? Or?
No. This is probably what you would call like music concrete, which is like using stuff where, yeah, you're using guitars, but you're making noises with the guitar rather than sort of, songs that are 3 chords. It was just a lot of sound and a lot of tape loops, and I'll play it for you sometime. It's totally not what you hear me doing now at all. Although I do that stuff still. I do experimental music a lot. That's totally not blues or any of that stuff.
So you dropped guitar after doing that during your teen
years?
Right,
and then I always felt like a failure. Actually, I always felt like that was this thing that I did that I failed at.
Music can be very humbling, that's for sure.
And like I just didn't understand. I love music, and I have a huge collection of music, and always was exploring and all of that. And at the point of actually trying to do it, it mystified me. Even basic 3-chord songs, just completely. I just didn't understand how to do it. And in my 20s, actually, I took up drums. I'd always been interested in drums.
You told me you were a drummer.
And I kind of, long story short, acquired a drum kit. And my roommate, also still a very good friend of mine, and this is like the mid 80s. She was okay with me setting up a drum kit in the attic, and I did. And I just said, and it was sort of a response to feeling like a failure on the guitar. I thought, well, I'm not going to take drum lessons. I'm just going to sit down on the drum kit for literally, how I got on them was, I'm going to sit on these things for 10 minutes a day and just do whatever I do. And just give it the time. And I'm just going to see what happens. And if I feel at a point like I need to take lessons, I'll do that. But I just wanted to sort of give the instrument the time. And I did that. I did that for years. And I wasn't really playing with people. I'd occasionally play. It was like my weird little private thing. People knew that drums, you can't hide that. But what was interesting is I did that, and I played along with a lot of music, and I worked out a lot of stuff, and it was a very intense, here I go, you'll love this because of being the spiritual dude. It was very much a kind of a voyage of self-discovery in terms of learning how to play the drums, but it was more than that for me because it had to do with paying a lot of attention and being very reflective about what was in the way of me doing it. Because I was incredibly neurotic and incredibly self-conscious.
What were the blocks?
That's like you and I talking for hours, literally. But the blocks, yeah. And what was interesting was after a few years, and this would have been not long before I started playing kind of this music, playing blues and guitar again, I got into doing hand drumming. And quite by happenstance at a gathering of a
like
party.
Djembes and...
Exactly. A friend of mine had some drums at a party, and I was sort of high enough and drunk enough to sort of get on them and have a good time. And all of a sudden I understood it. I mean, I literally had an epiphany. And just all of a sudden, the way that I was playing with the people, the sound of the drum, the incredibly complex sound of one drum. If you hit a drum and really listen to the sound that's going on there, people think it's just like a beat, it's just a thud. But when you really listen to it, there's a lot going on in the resonance.
A lot of sound, ripples of
Well, the drum head itself has a
vibration.
lot of resonance, and there's overtones, and there's all kinds of that stuff going on. And it's like, you find out that there's like this infinity of sounds practically going on there. And it's not just keeping a beat, it's creating a particular sound. And that just lit me.
So the epiphany was sort of realizing
how to connect to it.
Having just not just hitting an instrument, but...
Well, but it was one of those things where it's like you said, oh, he's going to talk about surrender. And it's like, it was kind of like that because what I found was that it wasn't an intellectual exercise. It was one of those things where I just started to play. And I just understood it. I just understood how to do it. And then I was obsessive. I was, anytime to play rhythm with people playing guitars or whatever, I was the guy who would show up with a couple of hand drums and shaky things and stuff like that. And then there was a point when here's the story. What happened was, this is around literally 20 years ago, exactly. I had a freelance project that I'd worked on for months. I had a pile of money. I'm coming into the summer, and I'd just been kind of burned out on this project. And all of a sudden, I thought, I'm going to give myself a summer vacation. It's not like I'm not going to take work, but I'll give myself a summer vacation and write. The idea was to write, like with discipline, like 8-10 hours a day. And I did. I really got into this. And when I write, I like to have very familiar music on. And I'm listening to a lot of, at the time, just stuff that I was listening to, which was a lot of trip hop and British trip hop music and house music from Chicago and a lot of Stevie Wonder, actually. And it was just the background, and I was kind of listening to stuff. And I had just, because this is the way I bought records, I'd always buy stuff that was interesting that I'd get around and listening to.
You have a very eclectic background.
Right, but I literally remember when I bought these two particular discs, I was in a Borders Books, and I just was walking by the blues section, and there were these two CDs just looking at me, and they were both Yazoo record compilations.
It's funny how sometimes things like that, books and records, will just jump out at you.
And I just thought, one of the reasons they jumped out was both of them had covers drawn by R. Crumb, and I'm a huge R. Crumb fan, the comic artist. And okay, well, one of them did, and the other one was just a picture of these old guys playing. And one of them was called Georgia Blues. The other one was just harmonica, early harmonica, something like that. And they were still in the wrapper. I'd had them, and I'd had both of these CDs just sitting there for like over a year at least. And I just hadn't opened them. And I thought, okay, I'll check that out. And I put it on. And it got my attention. And I had listened to old blues records. And we're talking about recordings from the early 30s-ish, from Georgia, from the Atlanta area. People like Blind Blake and Barbecue Bob and Kokomo Arnold and these folks. And I just was sort of like, whoa. And blues like that had always been sort of the DNA of music that I loved. A lot of rock music, clearly,
right,
Keith Richards, Eric Clapton talking about Robert Johnson and so forth. And I had some of that music, but it was just interesting museum pieces to me. It wasn't something that really connected. And then suddenly it did, and it did in this way that literally just, I was listening to these CDs, and I had the Robert Johnson box that came out. This is so cliche.
Yeah.
It drove me crazy because it was so fucking cliche when it happened to me. Because I thought, okay, well, I'm familiar with the Robert Johnson stuff, but it wasn't like, oh, I loved it, and I was all...
Yep.
And I'm writing, and I just put him on. I had both of the CDs just on repeat on my CD player as I was writing, and it was late at night, and I'm sitting there, and I'm writing, I'm working on something. I'm sitting at a typewriter writing, and I kind of sit back from the typewriter, and I'm thinking, and the music's playing, and all of a sudden, it just sucked me in, and it wasn't the music. It was kind of like, of course, it was the music, but it was the sound of the person making it. I could hear him in a room playing music, and I got this very intense impression of the actual human being making the music. And because that's what it is. It's a guy in front of a microphone in a hotel room in whatever, San Antonio, Texas in 1935, and et cetera, all that shit that I knew. And all of a sudden it was like all that stuff went away, and I just heard the guy making music in a room, and it wasn't even a recording. I heard right through the bacon frying on the, and I got it. It's hard to sort of...
It seemed very authentic.
It wasn't even about authenticity. It was just something about it was, it came out of the past all of a sudden. It was like he was there in the room. It didn't, and it was something, and the thing is all of a sudden I'm crazy about blues music. And I'd always sort of made fun of people who were into old blues records. Honestly, I'd had people try to turn me on that stuff.
And that sort of blues versus Chicago blues.
Anything. Anybody who was in old blues music were just like, insufferable like bores to me. I mean, they just drove me, and they still do. Honestly, there's plenty of people I just don't even like talking about music with, period, who just like, it's just, they add a lot of ornamentation and embellishment to something that is not necessary to the experience for me. So anyway, I mean, so it was kind of embarrassing is the point. It was literally kind of embarrassing that all of a sudden I was like crazy about blues music, my friend Robin that I mentioned.
What comes around is funny sometimes.
Well, it was funny, but it felt like, this is like, you feel like a joke is being played on you. The thing that got me to play guitar again, where I felt like a failure on it for like 15 years, was the music that I kind of wouldn't be caught dead playing. If I played blues music like in my teens,
Yep.
it was to make fun of it
Yep,
and make up
yep.
stupid lyrics and that kind of thing. And, Blind Lemon Pledge and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it took on a new meaning somehow. Your inner whatever was tuned into that.
Well, I knew I could do it. It's hard to explain. And because initially what got me actually was slide guitar just totally captivated me. And it wasn't just like, oh, I'd like to do that. It was something else that got me to pick it up and do it. It was like, I knew I could do it. There wasn't like, oh, how do I learn? It's like, I already know how to do that. I just have to do the work. And that came out of a lot of, again, my experience of playing drums for years, because it would be like, oh, gee, I want to do that thing that Charlie Watts does. And I knew I could do it. And we're not talking about something crazy complicated. It's a feel. It's kind of that whole finding the feel of what someone's doing. And it's not even copying what they're doing. It's getting that feel. And so when the blues happen and slide, and that was, I mean, the initial batch of CDs that I bought a couple of weeks into this kind of craziness was, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know what to go look for. So I went to the library, literally, and I read this book. It was called The Search for Robert Johnson by Peter Goralnik, who's a great music writer. And it's a real quick read. It's about 80 pages, and it just was kind of like clearing up a lot of the mythological horse shit about Robert Johnson, and there's so much there, bullshit about him. But it was talking about who this guy really was and his influences and how influenced he was by records, because he's that first iteration of literally folk musicians, otherwise blues people, who were influenced by recorded music.
Yeah.
So it was like Skip James, it was Son House. He knew Son House, but Booker White, Skip James, Son House. It might have been someone like Leroy Carr. But I bought like 6 CDs, little stack.
Uh-huh.
And then I just kind of started listening. And then it became voracious for a couple of years. And again, we're talking about 20 years ago, about 1998. Literally for about 3 years, not only did I listen to this old stuff, and not exclusively blues, but stuff recorded in that moment of time. But I couldn't listen to modern music. I couldn't listen to the Beatles. And I'm a Beatles fanatic. I've read all the books. I know so much about them. I couldn't listen to contemporary music. It was just boring. It was beyond boring to me. It was like I just wasn't interested in it all of a sudden. And it was all about, and it was still before the internet really took over. So I had to kind of go to Tower and find stuff or order it or borrow it or whatever. And I was just on this mission, and I just started accumulating all this stuff.
Well, that's, it sounds kind of profound in a way. I mean,
well, it was it was literally an epiphany, but it was one of those things where,
what is happening when that happens?
Oh, it's not a mystery to me why it happened. I mean, I did the work that was necessary. Let me put it that way. I did the work that was necessary to get to that point of ignition. That's kind of a mystery, kind of. But I had been in my basement or attic, depending on where I was living, playing my drums, and I mean like all the time I was doing it, and it was like the central part of my life. Like going through a couple of moves, I had to find a place where I could live, where I could have my drums set up, because it was this real self. It was learning to play the drums, but even more so, it was about self-discovery, about being neurotic, self-conscious. I'm not really a musician.
I know about grappling with that.
And everyone, you never stop grappling with that. When you talk to people who are amazing musicians, they're grappling with it. And so my struggle as far as blues goes is like in terms of songs that I'll play in front of people, like here at the shop. There's a lot of music. There's a lot of songs that I know that I'll never play here because that's just like I have no business playing them. Because I'm not a black sharecropper who's an illiterate from Mississippi or whatever in 1930 who's like got this particular experience, because a song might be so specific to that experience that I can't even say, well, this is kind of my version of that experience. It's like, nope, I can play it and I'll do it in my apartment, but I won't do it in front of everybody.
I tried a little bit of that based on something that you told me at a party a long time ago, and I forget exactly what was happening that you said it, but you said you should check out these old Alan Lomax, field recordings. It's kind of spooky stuff. Man, I started listening to that. I got into it. I got all kinds of, and Julie and I did a couple of performances. To your listeners, by the way, all
of that stuff is available online. Everything he recorded is available for free online.
I was listening to some of that
now.
today, our Hoolies and things like that. So Julie and I got into that and did a bunch of performances, and there was always this feeling of, why am I, little white guy playing this music?
And you should feel that way, because it's like you're not a guy doing horrible work in a prison chopping wood. And it's sort of like, there's a way to do it that's maybe okay, but there's also like, it's so like, okay, but at the root of that stuff, it's making like horribly horrible, unpleasant life
I had a lot of
tolerable. And the interesting thing about that stuff in terms of rhythm, because I'm so rhythmically oriented still, is that stuff was designed so that people didn't kill themselves, because you got 4 guys swinging their axes, and they've got to be timed so they don't chop each other's heads off. And that's a function of what that stuff is. Just like the railroad songs. Because, like one of my favorite blues guys ever, Sleepy John Estes, he used to do that. He used to call for the people laying track. And you would have a song that you would sing, and it would be like, okay, this is the point where they put down the tie or whatever, and then bam, bam, bam. And everything is about getting that rhythm. And it's like safety. It's like, yes, it makes work more pleasant to sing it, but it's also so you don't kill each other, because if you get out of sync, you're going to swing a pick and knock someone's head off, kind of thing. So it's like all of that.
It's amazing music. We'll talk a little bit more, if you don't mind, about the surrender aspect. I mean, were you sort of, when you had this epiphany, was that sort of surrendering? Or are you talking about when you're playing music, that you surrender to listening to what the song is?
Well, to me, it's a thing in life. I mean, that's every mystical religious tradition has surrender at its core, right? That you give yourself up to the mystery. I mean, you've got your intellectual life, you have your brain, which is your identity and the way you think and how you sort of get through your day with your identity and your thinking and your psychology and all this kind of stuff. But the mystery is enormous, because that's all this way of sort of contemplating all the unknowable stuff that we don't know about anything. And so there's that universe that exists in you as an individual that has to do with how do you... It starts with a statement. This is what I realized when I had my epiphany to start playing guitar. And even before that on drums, but to the point where I went public, so to speak, where I started playing with people and in front of people and for people, is the surrender is to... You're being drawn into something, and you may want it to look a certain way, or because you admire this or that person. Oh, wouldn't it be great to sing like them or play like them or whatever, any of that kind of stuff. But to get to a point where you say, it's real simple. I'm a musician. It sounds really simple. You just say that and don't qualify it. Like, I'm a musician. And at the point when I was starting, I was barely playing, but I'm like, I can't do this without accepting that I'm a musician, merely by the fact that I am picking up a guitar at that point and just working on it and seeing what happens. Where does this take me? Years and years ago, I write a lot, and I was struggling with it. We're talking about like I'm in high school or college, and a friend of mine, I'm going through all of this, like having beers, talking about writing, and he just looks at me and he's like, Mark, am I a writer or not? That kind of thing. And he was like, Mark, do you write? And I'm like, yeah, I write like obsessively. I write all the time. He goes, well, then you're a writer. And it was like, duh, but at the same time, it's like there's a way of hearing that where it gives you kind of permission. It gives you a starting point, because at that point you're like, oh, whatever I become as a musician and whatever I do it may sound like other things because I'm influenced by this and that and everything, but nothing's going to sound like me making music. And surrendering to that.
Yeah.
And of course, that just involves not just what I'm doing, but if someone else is there, what I'm doing with them and how I'm listening and how that communication is going. And then it just starts getting bigger and bigger if you're playing with more people. And then it's the whole, when you start playing in front of audiences or for people in any context, it's like this idea that you're surrendering to the environment you're in. And then it gets to this thing where it's like, even there, you've got this sort of the mental space in a way that you're doing that, but you're ultimately doing it in this kind of incredibly expansive way that's only limited by the context you're doing it. In other words, the context of the room you're playing it in. But you've got to be sort of in a way, the way that I got over like stage fright in the 15, 20 years ago, because I used to be paralyzed by it.
A lot of people are. It still is nerve-wracking.
is I thought, well, I've practiced this. I'm going to get up at the folk club in Reston, Herndon, and play 3 songs, and 3 songs just seemed like, oh my God, I hope I don't fuck them up. And I've worked on them, and I know how to play them, and I've done it right, and I've done it a bunch of times. But you get up and you fuck up for whatever reason. And I was getting very frustrated with that. And then I realized, it was one time where I was going to get on and play a couple of songs at the folk club in Herndon, which was sort of like my nursery in a way. And it was like, I got an image, and the image was sort of like driving a car and just let go of the wheel. Like, I've done everything I need to know to drive the car and shift the things and da-da-da-da. But at this point of going out there, I have to let go of the wheel and just like let it go.
Do whatever comes out. Whatever you do.
Because then, even though you've rehearsed something a certain way and you do it a certain way, because then surprises happen. And then you have to learn how to sort of not let the surprises throw you, because all of a sudden it happens when you're singing a song, and all of a sudden you sing a verse that's not even the song, but it works. It's like it came out of, where did that come from?
Yeah, they're in the wrong order or something.
But don't think about it. It's like, just go with it.
Yeah.
And you start to get into that moment where your music is so immediate and so in the present that you have to totally be in the present. And so you can't be judging it as you go, which is a whole sort of trick, right?
Yeah, I feel that.
And your brain turns off. You become unconscious. And when you're playing with people, and when I started to have this experience, it's kind of like I knew I was doing it right. When you play and you're in a certain, and this is about playing with people, you get this thing where you're playing and there's an understanding of what you're doing and what you're doing with other people that just all of a sudden becomes like this. It just becomes like, well, I know how to speak the English language, and you know how to speak, and it's just a conversation. And it's not only that, it's like 4, 3, 4, 5 people all talking at once. And you're listening to everybody equally and everything, and the balance just occurs. And it's always great because when that happens with other people, you just look at people's faces. You don't have to wonder. You can just look at the way they look, and okay, yeah, we're all there, because it's in the pocket. It's And so that goes in with like a whole other aspect of my life of like spiritual seeking, even though the word spiritual, it's sort of like relationship to the infinite and consciousness. What is that? And all these kinds of things. And all of a sudden I realized, well, all that sort of stuff just is here, but it's in a practical sense. In other words, music happens. It's
sort of knowable.
Well, yeah. I mean, you just can't. Music is not an intellectual thing, at least the kind that I do. Even though it may be blues and it may be a specific thing, it's just sort of. By definition, it's real simple music. If we're going to talk about blues and otherwise folk and country and that stuff, it's very simple music. Very often, it's no more than 3 chords, and even the words are very simple. And I mean, words as a structure, as poetic structure, easy. But what makes it come to life is like what you put into it. I mean, that's all cliche stuff, but it's absolutely true. So you don't have to be a great player to just be a killer blues person. You don't have to have all kinds of stuff. There's just this thing about you create sort of a little template, a little structure, and then you just
go.
Yeah, and you surrender to it. And the surrender has to do with the kinds of things you sing about, the person you are, because in music, singing music, in a way, making the sound of it as well. But if you're singing songs, it's interesting with blues because there's a lot of old songs that are like let me put it this way, very not PC.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the thing is I love those songs. I love those songs because you've got somebody singing about something, even though it was 80, 90 years ago, it's like they're singing about something which is like, even at the time wasn't too cool to sing about.
Yep.
Boom, but the thing is, but the thing is well, but that's a real experience, and there's that same kind of energy in terms of anyone's emotional life, which is not like I'm going to sing. I'm not going to sing a song about beating women because I don't. But there's songs about I beat my woman, or about being really dissolute and loads of drugs, or just being all that cliche blues stuff. But there's also like songs about how wonderful sex is and love. I mean, there's a lot of stuff when you really listen. It's like some of it's amazingly sophisticated.
So let me ask. A little, what I get from this conversation, what you're talking about is there is a real power there. There's a real something there, and you've seen it music affect you and other people. And
Right. Yeah.
So what is it? What is that about music? And, how can we tap into that? We're sort of changing things through music in small communities. How can we, use that power to help overcome the craziness?
I got kind of an answer, and it's interesting.
All right.
I got kind of an answer that is kind of a non-musical answer, but it is. And this has to do with like something I've always been very, very, very interested in is consciousness. And I mean, since I was a kid, the brain, how consciousness exists, how does it come? Where does it come from?
What up with that? What up with that?
It's an emergent phenomenon. It's something that your brain creates, or is it something else? Now, what's interesting right now, and I know this sounds like a tangent, but it's actually not. It is an answer. Is that in physics, and I mean real physics, right now, there's this idea that the ground of reality, out of which everything comes from, back to the Big Bang, and so forth. There's information built into it. In other words, everything is made of information. So there's a way of saying everything is made of consciousness, so that as life evolved on our planet, from like just chemicals reproducing to a cell to
Bubbling
all the way down to what we are. Consciousness isn't some sort of trick that happened at some point where our brains just sort of came up with this. It's been evolving every step of the way along with that. It evolved out of the nature of matter doing its thing, so to speak. And the thing is about music is it's there too, because of literally what you're doing in terms of messing with air, that math, that knowledge is built into it. There's certain musical things that are kind of universal. In most world traditions, there's such a thing as the 1 and the 5, just like octaves, the math of music.
Right.
Even though stylistically it can be all over the place, it's sort of like language. It's like when you look at language theory, like Noam Chomsky. I mean, his whole thing was, languages, they all seem so different. Japanese doesn't seem anything like English, but they're the same. There's a syntax that is universal. And so all these things sort of point to that. So in terms of the thing that it taps into in terms of sort of how to sort of be in a world that, however you sort of view the world in terms of its craziness or whatever, is that this is a thing that's available to everybody.
Music.
Yeah, it's totally available to everybody, and for all kinds of reasons, people feel like unworthy of it, or they feel like they can't do it, or whatever. But it's actually very accessible. I mean, that's my story. That is my story. I love music, and it took me decades to get to the point of like, oh, I can do this.
I can play this. I am a musician.
Yeah, and then it took a few years before I felt like I was any good. Like getting comfortable playing with other people and getting comfortable with sort of, again, opening up. And, singing is a big thing for me because I'm incredibly self-conscious about that. And this is a good example because singing, there's like one experience when I was a kid. My brother, who was a total dick, excuse me. No, he was a very negative kind of guy, and he was like kind of an interesting character. We were going on vacation. It was me, my brother. My sisters were not there. Me and my brother in the back seat of the car. My parents in the front seat. We're driving to the beach, and it's like 1974 because it's Chicago, and the song "Saturday in the Park" is playing. Mm-hmm. And I'm singing along with it because I was always singing along with stuff. And my brother said, "Shut up! You can't sing." And my mom immediately just said, "Chris, don't." But the thing is it stuck. It's stuck. And the funny thing is it's still there. And I've had all kinds of ways of dealing with that over the years. And I've had people come up and say, wow, you sing so great. I love your voice and all stuff. And I'm like, I can kind of hear that now because I've done the work. But it's things like that's where I have compassion for people who are like really, oh my God, they want to, but they're not doing music or anything in their life, but music, where it's things like that just stop people. It can be the little, and it's funny. I've had this conversation a million times with people who are players and not players about. Was there that I was in chorus and the teacher said something and it just, got in there.
There's a kind of that crippling self-doubt you have as a musician, almost no matter what stage you are. But you want to do it, but it's hard to overcome it. Well, this is really, I always love talking with you, and you have a lot of good points about things.
Right.
And I think what you're saying is, music is accessible. People should realize it's more accessible.
Yeah.
And that
and to the point of my own experience is that it can be like me, and I've said this to people. People are like, oh, you say, oh, I play blues. Oh, that's so cool. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. When I started to play blues, it was like kind of this embarrassing, weird thing for me that I was kind of like, I didn't even know how to deal with it. It really was that.
Yeah.
And so when I get into this conversation with people and try to sort of encourage them to explore, because they'll like, oh, I always wanted to play I said, just get one and start doing it, because you might start playing something. You might just all of a sudden, the thing for you is like, the thing for you might not be like you singing like Bonnie Raitt. It might be like playing in a gamelan or something. It might be something totally beyond your experience, but oh my God, all of a sudden I've got to play Indian classical music or drums or this or that.
Just take the steps toward that. Open yourself up. Surrender a
And
little
it'll
bit to
take
what's
you.
inside you.
No, because come on, for me, it's like, I kind of, when I got into doing, again, I should have said this when I got into hand drumming and I just started playing in circles and stuff. I got some good people to play with, but I also kind of would go to drum circles where there was all this kind of like Dreamcatcher horse shit stuff going on that was really kind of stripping it of the power of it, because you're opening yourself up to something that is the absolute essence of all music, is the concept of rhythm in some way or another, and it's enormously powerful, and it's one of those things where people get very put off by that, but I was really like, oh shit, I'm going to be one of those drum circle people. Seriously, because I've got a lot of opinions about stuff, and so I didn't want to be like another hippie Grateful Dead drum circle guy, but then all of a sudden I came into it and I found my way of being in there, where that ego shit and that opinion shit could just sort of evaporate and I could be in the experience. Because then you can play with people. The thing about music that's great is there's people that I play with, let me put it this way, who personally, they're, it's not like I don't like them, but some people I kind of don't like them. And personally, there's things about them that make me crazy, but oh my God, do I love playing music with them.
Yeah.
And there's several people that I know who we have that understanding, even if it's like politics. Real right wing. I have this friend, I haven't seen him in a couple of years, but he was pretty right wing. Having a couple of years, meaning last time it was like when when W was in office. And there was this, I played with this guy a number of times, and he was like kind of a bluegrasser, and I met him at those kinds of jams. And I had a sticker on my mandolin case that said, "Friends don't let friends vote Republican." And he looked at it and he goes, "I think that President Bush is doing a good job." And I said to him, I love playing music with you. I really like you doing this. Can we just never talk about politics? And he was just like, yeah, okay. And we were good. Cool. And this is a person I love to play with, where when we played, it was just like mental telepathy. It was crazy. A really great connection. And that's the thing that's interesting about it, because it really does break through that shit. If people are in the right space about it, if the people are in the right headspace about it, they can be like, the only thing that matters right now is playing this song, and I really don't like that guy or that woman or whatever, but oh my God,
I can get over that and play.
I can get over it.
Yeah.
And that'll naturally get you to sort of go into that other stuff in a way which can be genuine curiosity rather than just, contention and argument. It can be, kind of like, well, how did you come to that? To think that way that I don't really like, kind of thing. And I think I have some friendships that have grown in that way because their origins were in playing music.
Yeah.
Where otherwise, like just, hot off the press, sitting at a party with a beer in the kitchen talking to somebody, it could turn into like, but if you're playing with someone and then you sort of find out that kind of stuff, you can kind of ease into it more because you're like, well, there's something right about them because they've clearly got the music thing going.
A lot of positives about music. Skip, I think we could keep talking for a while longer, but
That's
we're
it?
gonna have to wrap it up here a little bit.
Do I get a part 2? Come on, give me a part 2, Jeffrey.
Yeah, we can do a part. We can do a part 2. No problem. A lot of really good information, good thoughts there. I appreciate.
But the thing
your
is,
time.
let me put it this way. I'll say something again, and maybe this is sort of being redundant. I know that my personal story, I mean, in terms of doing what I do musically, as I said, it really became a thing that became sort of a public thing all in the last 20 years of my life. And I'm 55 years old, so there's your context. And all the time before that I had to work up to that is that's all I know. All I know is that everybody's on a particular journey and that it always is work and it's always about surrender and it's always about that allowing yourself to sort of be consumed by something that is beyond your ideology and your intellectual approach to it. And it opens up a lot of stuff. And it's like, it opens up a lot of stuff. You'll learn a lot about yourself doing that because you're going to learn a lot about things that need to be expressed that are all of a sudden coming out, like, oh, wow, they've got an outlet. Other things that are like your repressed stuff, your negative stuff about yourself, your positive stuff about yourself, because very often it's also, it may be uncomfortable in a sort of a self-negating way, sort of self-critical way to sort of do stuff. But there's also that you're also drawn to say stuff. And that's incredibly vulnerable because if so to speak, right, like in the sense of like writing your own songs.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Right. You write your own songs, and all of a sudden
set yourself up for it.
You're saying like, well, this is what I have to say about this, and this is what I'm putting out about that. Now that's the point I'm at, is songwriting, because my next thing is to write songs to play in front of people. I've written songs. I've yet to, well, minus a couple of moments, never played them in front of other people because it's like it's just not there yet. And it's beyond.
It feels
whether
like it's coming.
Well, no, it is because I keep working on it. I'm working on it. I mean, I have like a whole hopper full of stuff, and I have songs that are recorded where it's the music is all there, and there's some words attached to it, and it's like there's all of this sort of process. It's kind of like a compost heap of stuff, and a couple of them are actual songs, but the block, the barrier is, do I really want to say this shit to other people? Not that it's offensive or anything. It's just sort of like, do I really want to be that open?
So,
you know?
I mean, in a way, music is sort of this constant coming out of your comfort zone situation. Anyway.
I didn't even get to talk about like fractal consciousness, Jeffrey.
That's in part 2. It's in part 2. All right, everybody. Thanks very much, Mr. Mark Skip Casale. Appreciate it. You've been listening to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society. We talk with musicians and others about the power of music and how we can use music to help create a better world. Please check out our website, www.planetarygigs.org, for information about some of the organizations promoting music and musicians, resources about the power of music, books, movies, articles, including new research on music and the brain. We welcome your support. The Planetary Gig Society is a Section 501c3 charitable organization, and you can donate on the website. You also can receive a free email signature block demonstrating your support for Planetary Gig Society. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Planetary Gigs. And we want to thank fabulous musician and teacher Eric Weinberg of Little Eric Studios for the Planetary Gig Talk music titled Chill Kid, It's Saul. So please check out Planetary Gig Talk on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Subscribe and hear all the upcoming episodes. Thanks very much.